for having me back again. You know, I love these webinars and seminars that I do for my University of Chicago family and our friends and our colleagues. One of the things that I do want to share with everyone moving forward is that Linda will be helping me let go of control. She will be actually taking charge of the PowerPoint presentation. So you'll hear me say next slide, and she'll be advancing the slide because I'm unable to do that from where I am today. So with that said, I wanted to put that out there and let you guys know that so you don't wonder what I'm talking about. The next thing that I want to make sure you all have is some paper and something to write with, a pen or a pencil, or if you're a typer on your phone or your iPad, something to take notes, because this is one of those webinars, as you know with me already, that you're going to get some context to help you organize and make sense, because our left brain needs that type of stimulation so our right brain can come in and integrate at a deeper level and really get that aha moment. So I want to make sure that you all have that opportunity to take notes, and then to also type in your questions as we go along, right? Because if there is something that I'm talking about that you just need clarification on, feel free to type that in. Linda will let me know that there's a question, and I'll answer that question right then and there. If you don't have a pressing question, you can always write it down, type it in at the end of the presentation, and Linda will make sure that we ask and answer those questions as well. So we have set aside enough time in the webinar to be able to answer as many questions as possible. Anything that we don't get to, or any questions you might have for me, say after the webinar, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm always happy to respond to my University of Chicago family and peeps and bring clarity where there may be a little confusion, okay? And then I do want to reiterate, check out the webinars this month for Career Month. There are some amazing topics that you probably, didn't come across just yet because we have so many, but I do encourage you. I know I'm signed up for several because they just seem really fascinating, and it's always great to hear from fellow alumni, just to hear how they reframe things and handle certain situations and industries differently and uniquely, okay? So with that said, let's go ahead and get started, Miss Linda. She's our Vanna White of the webinar today. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide. And I want to start off by talking about our objectivity, right? We're talking about how not to take things personally. We want to try to remain objective, and we want to be able to let go. But what actually stops us from being objective, right? And if you've ever had or felt like someone was just personally attacking you, you know how challenging it can be to be objective, right? To maintain that clarity, to stay grounded and present, because you're feeling like they're just coming for you. Right, and how many of you, and you could just type yes or no, never had that experience, just type that in your box, and Linda's going to let me know, what the experiences of you all are, generally speaking. So go ahead and type. Have you ever felt like someone was just personally attacking you, just kind of out the blue, and you couldn't stay straight? You couldn't stay focused?
I could say that this is a very familiar feeling with this crowd. Overwhelming.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of people have that experience of feeling like they've been personally attacked. So one of the things that I want to be sure that you start to think about is, what is it that a simple experience, right, that you have had a difficult time remaining objective and you may have reacted to it, right? And when we advance this next slide, I want to ask you all to think about that struggle of letting go. So when we go to the next slide now, the question is, have you ever had a hard time letting go of something that someone did to you, right? Because if we combine that experience with that first experience, right, of being personally attacked, oh my God, do we find ourselves in a tsunami, kind of being tossed all over the place? Because not only in that moment do we feel like we're on the defense, right? But as we move throughout the day, the week, the month, the years, we carry that with us. So how many of you have ever had a hard time letting go of something? It could have happened years ago, days ago, maybe yesterday or this morning, but you're still stuck in it, right? So I want you to, at this point, start to think about that. And I want you to start to think about one situation. I don't want it to be an intense or a deep situation, but identify a situation where you have had a hard time letting go of something, that something has really bugged you or pulled your goat that you just want to get some clarity on today. And we're going to use that as kind of an exercise, a practice, if you will. So I just want you to write that down, something really easy, low-hanging fruit, not too intense, not too overwhelming. Okay? And because we're going to be talking about things that go into your personal space that you don't have to share with us, but that you know is going into your personal space, I always say I want my clients and my patients to be educated consumers. Don't just take in information just for the sake of taking in information. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about me so that way you can decide for yourself if what I'm sharing with you today is credible for you to take in. Because you have to be able to trust the source of where you're receiving information. I know you guys are going to check it because that's what you do, but I want to make sure I do my due diligence and stand in my integrity and share with you who I am. Many of you already know I'm from the University of Chicago last century. We're not going to pay attention to that number. I got my master's over at the School of Social Service Administration, got my bachelor's at F&M. I'm an ordained minister. I have a doctorate in Rohan. I've been practicing for nearly 3 decades. So I've been doing this a while. All of you who know me know that I love quantum physics. So everything that I do has an element of physics, whether we're talking about quantum entanglement or the quantum xenon theory, all that kind of stuff. So when I do work with folks, whether they're coming in for a career struggle that they're wanting to sort through, some type of depression, anxiety, performance anxiety, whatever it is, they know that they are coming in to get work done quickly without kind of lollygagging around. And sometimes they come in to do psychotherapy in whatever form that is for them. And then sometimes they come in to do psychological surgery where it's very focused, very specific. And so when they've gone as far as talk therapy can go, when they've learned as much as they can learn and their mind know as much as it can know, that's when they'll come in and they'll say, hey, I'm ready for a deeper session. And so that's what I'm known for, is the psychological surgery with my clients and my patients from all around the world. So that's me, and I hope that is sufficient for today to allow you to take in this information, fact check it for yourself, and see if that resonates or is helpful for you. Okay? So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, the big thing that most people always want to ask is, why do I take it so personally? You know, some folks will say, why am I so thin-skinned, right? Or why is such and such thick-skinned? They seem to just let it all roll off their back like water, right? Which is why I picked this particular presentation with the water drops. And the reason is that it's all relative, okay? And we're going to talk about what that means, and we're going to talk about what our triggers are, right? And why some people are triggered more than other folks. It's not that the same thing doesn't happen. It's just that their reaction or their connection to it is very, very different. And everybody has a trigger that can get them to go from 0 to 100 in 3.2 seconds, while other people have the same trigger and they might not react. They may just respond. Okay, so before we go into that practical component of this is how you do that, I want to give you guys context. And you know, as I shared with you at the beginning, there's going to be a backstory. There's going to be context given to you. So when I give you the tips, it's going to make sense, or hopefully it will make more sense, right? I want to plant the seeds of understanding and awareness so that you're just not going out into the world just doing stuff. Because that's not fun. That doesn't make you powerful. That just kind of makes you a robot doing these things that you think you're supposed to do and not really understanding why you're doing them. Okay? So the backstory is about to start now, and we're going to cover it in the next two sections, and then we're going to go straight into those tips. Okay? So let's go to the next slide. And what we want to really start talking about is the reason we take things personally and why those triggers are so important. And triggers are basically emotional bookmarks, or as we call it in clinical psychotherapy, right, somatic markers. Right? We take things personally when there is some type of experience that has left an emotional hook for us. And that emotional hook is really an opportunity for us to either heal or increase our self-awareness around that experience. It's an opportunity to heal or increase self-awareness around that experience because there's a lesson in it for you. And this is how we grow. And this is why we often take things personally, because we don't realize, no, there's a point in that. It's not that you're thin-skinned. It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's that, oh, no, you need to go back and answer this question. You need to figure this one piece out. You need to address that because there's some gold there that you forgot to get. It's a very natural way that our minds and our bodies grab our attention so we can tune in to where we need to grow and heal. It's not just all over. It's in a very specific place. So remember, these are these emotional hooks that are very familiar to us. Sometimes it's cumulative. It's happened over and over and over again, not just in the workplace. It might get exaggerated or called out in the workplace, right? But it could be in our personal lives. It can be socially. It could be with our friends, right? But it's something that's familiar. And that history of when that seed was planted has really left its mark on us. And it's usually very exaggerated or has a very strong impression in our minds. And this is both positive and negative experiences. So when we fall in love or something wonderful happens to us, we remember that. When something breaks our heart or happens to us that brings us this deep sadness or grief or regret, we remember that too. And there's that feeling of, here we go again. That's usually what most of us think. It's happening all over. When the reality is no, sweet soul, we're going back because there's some gold you forgot to get. There's a lesson in that. Once you get the lesson, something magical happens, which means it shifts. It either no longer shows up, or when it does, it no longer bugs you or pulls your goat the way it used to. Okay? So as we start to really get into the backstory of this, you're going to get a better sense of what this looks like and how you're going to address it. I promise. So let's go ahead, and I want to make sure I check in. Are there any questions, Linda? Or are we all good?
I think we're good right now. Thank you.
Okay. So let's talk about the universal laws that apply to literally everyone. Okay, this is part of the backstory. Now, be mindful. There are dozens of physics laws, right? Everything is rooted in physics. And you all know that I love my quantum physics. And you might be wondering, well, how do you include quantum physics in psychology? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward and relatively easy. And so that's why people heal faster. That's why people grow faster. That's why they work through things faster, right? When you combine quantum physics and psychology, you get kind of that space-time continuum bend, right? If you understand that everything in the universe is governed by the laws of physics, even psychology, you begin to understand how things work and how some people resolve things quickly and why some people don't, and they struggle and they suffer really unnecessarily, right? The reason why psychology appears to be this kind of ephemeral and elusive type of subject is because they don't understand, most people don't understand that it's the laws of physics that get filtered through the personality, the temperament, and the disposition of each individual that makes it appear to be different, but the laws are still the same. So once you understand the laws that are applied to everybody, you see the essence of it working in each person's life, and then you can see the lesson that each person is learning. This, again, is the backstory. So I really want to make sure you guys pay attention and ask questions if you have any. So as we move to the next slide, right, I'm going to show you 4 laws. There are 4 laws that we're going to talk about today. There are not 4 laws that are universal. There's more, right? So next slide here. The first of the 4 laws that I want to talk about today, because they do tie into each other, is that 1, you are everything in this world, both good and bad. Given the right circumstance, we could do the most horrific things. Given the right circumstance, we could do the most amazing things. People say, I could never kill anybody. Right? But if somebody was trying to kill you and you had to defend yourself and fight for your life, it's possible. Some people might say, I would never steal. But if you were hungry and your children were hungry and you were starving and they were about to die, you would steal bread. You would probably steal some food. Right? So we're everything in this world, good and bad. Just like if the circumstances were right and you had $1 billion, I'm sure you would help someone. Okay? So we're going to remove the judgment. We're everything in this world. The second law is that this isn't about specific behaviors. People think that, oh, my boss or my colleague, they're a liar, they're this, they're that. This isn't about specific behaviors. It's about the essence of what you see. If what you see under there is manipulation, fear, arrogance, maybe even altruism or love or compassion, this is about the essence underneath the behavior. So everybody could probably do the same behavior, right? So if someone went up to someone and hit them, one person would connect with the essence of it being mean. Maybe another person watching that would connect with the essence of it being abusive, right? But each person brings their awareness and applies the meaning or pulls the meaning from that behavior. This is why several people can watch the same thing and see something very different. This is how we project into the world. So this is about you. I want you to take that example that we started with at the beginning of this webinar, and I want you to start thinking about what's the essence of that thing, right, that I'm taking personally. What is it? Do I feel bullied? Do I feel disrespected or whatever? Right? I really want you to start to play with this. Don't take it so seriously. Remember, this is supposed to be an example that's not very intense for you. We're just going to touch it and see what's going on and play with it a little bit. Okay? And we're going to go more into this second law in a couple of more slides. The third law, you create everything in your life. You've created it. You might not like it, but you did it. Universal law, you don't have to like it. Don't send me an email getting upset with me. I didn't come up with the law. That's just what it is. Okay? And understand that your personal responsibility is going to lead to that increased self-awareness once you can own that. And if you created everything in your life, then that means you can change it. That means you have the power to do that. Your power is not out there with your boss or your colleagues. That is internal to you. That is huge. So many people look for a guru. They look for a mentor to save them. The truth is, no one is coming to save you. And now you're going to understand why and how to save yourself. How do you let that go and step into a new space where you create a new experience? And that's the fourth law. Every choice we make holds a set of experiences that are probabilities connected to that choice. Every choice. And every experience we have holds a lesson. Every last one of them. Whether the lesson is don't touch a hot stove, right? Don't touch the fire. Or whether the lesson is don't put the fork into the electric socket. There's always a lesson in every experience. And sometimes if we blink, we'll miss it. And that's okay, because we'll get that lesson once again in a different form. The essence will still be there. It just may look different, right? This is why you go back to law number 2 in the slide. It's not about the specific behavior. It's about what we see, the essence of what we see. What's underneath that? Okay? So now let's go to the next slide, and we're going to talk about the purpose of intensity, right? People will say, well, it just really just made me so angry, it infuriated me, I just saw red, or I don't even remember what happened. That's how angry I was, or I was so hurt, I just fell apart. Sometimes people will cry in a meeting and just break down, or they'll leave and they'll go to the bathroom, or they'll throw something when it's really, really overwhelming and intense. We've heard of stories like this, and maybe it's happened to you. And that's okay, because you didn't really know the purpose of the intensity, because you probably missed all of the opportunities for you to actually address whatever the purpose was or learn whatever the lesson was. But the reason that things are so intense is it's the doorway, right, to the thoughts and the behaviors that either keeps us stuck or that sets us free. But because we're talking about kind of, getting stuck, that's what this presentation is going to focus on. But remember, it's both good and bad. The laws apply the same. Okay? So let's move on to the next slide and really start to talk about why we need that intensity, right? What does intensity do? It captures your attention, doesn't it? The exaggerated quality in the intensity, right, allows us to really pay attention to something because it's exaggerated, because it's kind of cartoonish. How many times in this year or the last year, maybe this month, have you said, can you believe that was the most ridiculous? But isn't it the most ridiculous things that we remember? Probably because we didn't pay attention to the things that led up to that most ridiculous thing happening. The exaggeration or the ridiculousness of something didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was built over time, right? So if you start to really take a look at things, the intensity says, hey, wake up, look over here. And when people, when we take the victim role, because I know I, will fall into, oh, you did this to me and that, right? We all do that at some point, maybe not as often as other people. You start to realize that people can only do to you what you've already done to yourself, right? And the rule is that if you've seen it, you've done it. If you've seen it, you have done it. So if you saw an expression of love, then you've probably expressed love yourself. If you saw someone express gratitude to a colleague or a coworker or to a group or a team, you've probably done that yourself and maybe not realized it. The same as if you saw someone steal someone's idea. How have you stolen something from someone, right? It's not going to look the same. This is why we have to look at the essence underneath the behavior. What is it that you feel? Because it'll have the same feeling to it. You stay in this place over and over and over again. You get surrounded by the same experience until you learn the lesson. All you need to do is learn the lesson by 51%. That's the tipping point. For those who like Gladwell, you'll know what I mean by that, right? So as we start to really think about how we've created these experiences, so we can learn these lessons, you're going to start going, oh my goodness, that happened here and that happened there. That happens in this meeting all the time. Or that happens at home with me all the time. I never feel appreciated. I always feel overlooked. People lean too much on me. People always pull on me and I let them. I'm a people pleaser, whatever, right? We can go on. The list can last forever. The thing that I want you to write down right now, if you have your pen and paper, when we talk about identifying or learning the lesson, it's the knowing what the lesson is. What is the point in this experience? Combined with the expression of the emotion of that experience that reduces the hold it has on you. I'm going to say that again. It is the knowing of the lesson. Once you know what the point of that experience is for you and the emotion that goes with that, once you express that emotion that goes with that lesson, that experience, it doesn't have the same hold on you again. Doesn't mean you're not going to have a response to it, but it becomes less intense. That's how you know you're moving towards 51%. Because what will happen is that you'll start to respond from a different place because you understand it differently. This is where our left brain just eats it up. It's just delicious. Because our left brain wants to think about stuff and doesn't want the feeling to come in. But if you don't capture that emotion, your left brain will be a hamster wheel. You have to identify what that feeling is, and you have to express it. Now, you have to do it appropriately, right? So I don't want anybody getting off this webinar going, Jinnie said to go express my anger, and you go and get fired from your job this afternoon. That, I'm not saying to do that at all. Okay? That's something that, if it's really intense, you might want to have somebody help you work through that so you can really identify what is there so it's accurate. All right? So let's move on to the next slide because this is where the gold is. This is what you signed up for the webinar to receive, right? The shift. Remaining objective and letting go. So before we move on to this, I just want to check in with our amazing Linda to see if there are any questions that came up that I can answer before we move on. So that way I can do the tips and it'll make more sense to you.
Yeah, we're getting some interesting questions about how you can work on forgiving yourself. So this question is phrased, you had mentioned a lot of the things that happen to you, that there's some agency on the individual's part. But if you recognize a pattern in yourself that perhaps you are bringing harm into that cycle, what are some constructive steps we can use to work on forgiveness and moving forward?
Yay, and this is why I love these webinars because they're very, very provocative and I get awesome questions. So we're going to actually answer that question in this section. So the forgiveness piece, remember, if you can forgive yourself, you can forgive another person. And the only way to be able to forgive yourself is to have compassion. You have to understand, and this is very gestalty, right? This is very parts or inner child work. This is where you observe you, not like an observing ego, kind of Anna Freudian way. But this is where you actually watch your movie and you stay grounded and present to see that part of you. What happened? What happened that took away the happiness of that little boy or that little girl and created a faulty thought about who they were, right? Whether it's I'm unlovable, no one likes me, right? No one could ever want to work with me. No one. Sure I understand. Oh, okay. So this is Siri. I'm sorry, you guys. I have a watch, an Apple Watch, and apparently it's eavesdropping. I apologize. And it doesn't understand what I'm talking about. So this is that part of you that if you're looking to forgive, that you may need to have someone work with you. So that way you can maintain some distance, not objectivity, but some distance so you can see it more clearly and and consistently, and not kind of get pulled back into the experience. Okay. So, but we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. And so when we talk about making the shift, this is what you know you want to have your pen and your paper for, because you want to write these tips down. I know you guys have the PowerPoint and the recording, but writing always does something to anchor it into our being, right, into our bodies. So that's a great question. Was there anything else, Linda, or was that pretty much a good core question for the group?
I think we'll add one more. Thank you, everybody who's writing these in. These are really insightful, and I think contributing to the larger conversation. So we have a question about the emotion of an experience of fear of perhaps being called out or caught out as a bad guy or as incompetent, when perhaps you're really just doing your best. Who is a safe person in the workplace or otherwise to talk through this emotion with? Is there value in a third party that sees the fuller picture?
Yes, I will say absolutely. However, in the workplace, you have to be very mindful of who you go to. Sometimes before you go to someone in the workplace, you want to talk with someone who's not invested in the situation, right? Or who's not aware of that individual and you, who can just hear what you have to say and pick up the essence of what you're saying. Because oftentimes what I've noticed with my clients, especially when they fly in and they're telling me about a situation that I know nothing about, right? I listen to them and I might pick up something very different than what they're trying to communicate. So they might say this person's very obnoxious and rude, and a know-it-all. I'm just pulling some combinations, right? And as they're talking, I might say, it sounds like you feel disrespected or unappreciated. And they'll go, that's it. Right? Because if somebody's in the workplace, they might know the both of you and try to negotiate a shared understanding. Remember, this is about you. So you may not do it the same way, but the essence is the same. So if someone is doing that to you, the first question you ask yourself is, how do I do that? Right? And so instead, why don't we just go to the next slide, because that's the next slide. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. So the next slide, I definitely want you to use that story that I asked you guys to pick earlier in the webinar. Okay, and I want you to start to think about it. Now we're going to play with it a little more, like some dough. Now we're going to start making something with it. Okay, so this is the $6 million question. This is what my prop traders, or traders in general, and definitely the quants, the programmers who create those high frequency programs, they love Yandy's Inner Light. Yandy's Inner Light to them is like coaching on steroids, because this is the question you learn to ask and answer. How do I do that? And I'm going to tell you why we're starting with this particular question. And this is why I say, before you go to someone in your workplace, you need to be able to talk yourself through this question. Because if you accept that this situation is a mirror of you, remember we talked about the second law earlier in the slide, and you understand you may not do it the same way, but the essence is the same. So say they're disrespecting you, and you say, well, how do I disrespect myself? How do I disrespect other people? Well, maybe I don't listen to my kid. Maybe I go, that's not a big deal. Or maybe I was dismissive of a concern that, a customer had, or a client had, or a colleague had. And I said, you know what? I think you're just sensitive. Maybe, you went to a certain school and somebody went to another school and you poo-pooed the school that they went to, right? It doesn't have to look the way that you experienced it, but you're always going to ask yourself that question first. How did I do that? How do I still do that? Doesn't mean you're doing it now. Doesn't mean you do it often. It just means that, I can relate to that. I've done that too to people. And there's a reason for this. There's a reason for this. Because if you do the same thing, remember, if you see it, you've done it, both good and bad. So now I'm acknowledging, yes, I've been disrespectful. I'm going to be very honest. I got 4 kids. And there's times I'm just like, you know what, that's not a big deal. But to my kid, that was a big deal. And I just completely dismissed and minimized it. And because I'm human, I'm not a perfect parent, right? We have a college fund, right? Never return home to mom fund, and a therapy fund, because of course you're going to make mistakes. No one's perfect. This is about removing the judgment. How did I do that to somebody else? How have I done that to myself? Right? How have I disrespected myself? Well, maybe when I don't speak and ask for what I need, I've disrespected myself. So of course they're going to disrespect me because I don't even speak and ask for what I want. And that's an example, right? And remember, your behavior draws to you those certain set of experiences that you've chosen when you engaged in that behavior. Okay, so once you can identify how you do the same thing, then you can now look, oh, now let me look at the situation with fresh eyes. How have I created that situation or brought those individuals into my life to help me learn this lesson of speaking up for myself, of respecting myself? So if we take that kind of, hypothetical situation of disrespect, maybe I might say, you know what, I noticed that when I made a statement, you didn't say anything, but when Mark said the same thing, you heard him. I'm wondering, did I not speak loud enough, or I just want to make sure that you heard me, right? That's using your voice. That's saying, I respect myself enough to know that I want to be heard. I don't want to hide, okay? And I'm just using that as an example. Each of you will have a different example, a different way, okay? So I want to, before we move on, Linda, were there any questions about that $6 million question of how do I do that?
Yeah, we're getting several questions about this objectivity and how can you balance being objective and perhaps is there a danger of that objectivity sliding into a failure to take personal accountability?
Right. There is, if you don't include your emotion, if you don't grab the essence, if you act as if you didn't do that, right? So that question of how do I do that keeps you grounded. Being objective doesn't mean that you don't have any emotional connection to it. Being objective means you are not caught up in the emotion of it. You can make a rational decision with a fuller set, with a full set of data, right? Because it's not that they just didn't hear you. It's just that you felt disrespected. That's why you might be taking it personally. In order for something to be personal to you, there's an emotional hook. Remember, from the earlier part of the webinar, there is an emotional hook. That is what makes it personal. And if you try not to connect with that emotion, oh man, will you be seen as an arrogant person, and people will exaggerate that behavior that you don't like or exaggerate that experience you don't want even more until you acknowledge the essence of the emotion underneath that behavior, underneath that experience. Right? So it's not about not connecting to the emotion. This is about connecting to the emotion and understanding it as a point of data. But in order to do that, you have to feel that. You have to understand that. You have to own it. You have to own, these are the situations where I've done that. That is where your objectivity comes from, because now you're no longer a victim. You're no longer a perpetrator. You're no longer a rescuer. Now you're an observer. I'm watching this movie. Does that make sense?
That's helpful.
And it's okay if it doesn't.
I'm getting some questions about, on this, how do I do that? Perhaps you could provide some more examples on how to operationalize that.
Sure.
Hear stories about how do you do it, but what are some action items?
Right. So I'm going to give you an example because we have two more sections to this that builds off of this. But I'm going to give you an example. I'm just going to use, myself, right? So you guys know I have 4 kids. I have a husband. And if I I'm really tired after a long day of surgeries, and I go home and they say, Mom, I want dinner. And say my husband, he just got home and he didn't make dinner. I might be really cranky and mean and rude. And then I'll leave the next day and I'll go to the Dunkin' Donuts and they're rude and mean to me. And I want to react to that and go, why would you do that? But I pause and I go, how did I do that? They were rude to me. How have I been rude? Oh, maybe they're cranky too. And so my response to them may be, oh, you know what? This isn't what I asked for. And I definitely know there's a rush this morning, so I know what it's like. Right? That's compassion that we had for ourselves first that now I can give to another. And this is how people can turn around a bad situation. We see it happen all the time. We don't know the mechanics of it. But let's advance to the next slide because this is going to get a little more interesting, okay? Because when we say, how did I do that? You're just going to look at all the ways you've been the essence of that. Rude, disrespectful, arrogant, right? So the next slide is, why do I do that? Right? Now, when we ask ourselves why I did that, this is directly connected to some kind of need that was either not met, or this is connected to some kind of experience that robbed you of something meaningful or something that you did need, but was never expressed or fully heard by another person. This is tied to an unmet need, whether it was physical, emotional, or mental, every time. So if you think of a situation at work, and we're going to go back to being disrespected, that's not the first time you felt disrespected. That might have been the loudest time. That might have been the most recent time, but that was not the first time you felt disrespected. Some people, right, did not feel respected as a child, maybe because their dad wanted a boy, maybe their mom wanted a girl, maybe, they didn't want any kids, maybe, they weren't the right height or whatever, or maybe they weren't smart enough, who knows? But this is not the first time you felt it. This is the most recent time, right? Remember, the essence of our behavior draws a certain set of experiences. I want you to identify what they are. So I want you to find that experience that comes up over and over and over again. And I bet you there's a behavior that is tied to it that comes up as a theme, just like the theme of the experiences that come up. And each experience gets louder and louder, or it multiplies. And then the lesson that you're trying or having a difficult time learning should be nice and clear at that point. So maybe the lesson is, I need to be nicer to myself, not to other people. If I'm not nice to me, of course other people aren't going to be nice to me. Of course I'm going to take everything as a personal offense because you hurt me and because I can't protect myself. I don't know how to defend myself emotionally. I don't know how to see and understand myself mentally outside of being a really smart person or outside of being a really beautiful or really strong or really powerful person. There's more to us than just the one or two things that we see or define ourselves as. We're very dynamic and expanded individuals, but we limit our awareness of who we are to one or two things. This is why we take things personally, because when someone pokes us in that area that's really sensitive or very raw, we go, ouch, I don't like that, and stop it. Don't do that. So we don't know, one, what it is they're doing outside of hurting us. And then two, we don't know how to help ourselves. So this is why we give our power away. So this is a very introspective piece. The tips are very introspective. A lot of times we'll want to jump to, how do I make that practical? Give me the steps, A, B, C, and D. And I always lovingly smile because I will tell people I just did. You have to be honest with yourself. And I'll say to my clients, who hurt you when you were little? When did this first happen? Because it didn't just happen on the plane today. This was the most recent time it happened, but when was the first time this happened? Because over the years, it's been building. That's why it's a theme. And there's something that you know you need to do that you don't want to do because you're afraid. Whether it's you're afraid of people getting angry with you or being kicked out or left out, right? Because you don't know how to handle that awareness. But this is where you start learning. Okay? Are there any questions around that, Linda? I'm sure there are, but any questions around that?
Yeah, here's one that I think you could provide some perhaps clarity on. You've talked about this importance of, standing up for yourself and being kind to yourself. The question is, this framework perhaps seems to suppose that we've treated someone the way that we were treated, but what would you advise in the case of, more outsized, perhaps like a workplace abuse or just things that are outside the scope of acceptability? How do you
Sure.
that?
Yeah. And so here's the thing, and this is why people get really anxious, right? They start to get really fidgety. Because it's not that what's happening in the worst workplace is not acceptable, right? It's not that it's okay. What's happening in the workplace is real. Sometimes you work in toxic environments, and this is why people leave jobs. It's not because they hate the job, it's because they hate their manager. Okay? So we're all clear on that. Those have been studies that have been done time and time again. You still have to look at you. Even if you haven't done it to anybody else, say you've never harmed anybody, say you've never acted out, you've done it to yourself. How have you abused yourself? What have you denied yourself? Right? And I don't know what that is for each person because we have almost 200 people on the webinar, right? But you've done that to yourself in ways you probably are unaware of. It's in your blind spot, as we call it. And this is why I tell people you might need some help in that. When it comes to actually addressing it in the workplace, you absolutely need to address it. That doesn't mean you go to therapy for 5 years and you put up with the abuse in the workplace until you have some corrective emotional experience and have this aha moment. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, in order for you to address it effectively, you have to have a sense or a point of reference with yourself. Whether you've hurt yourself or another person, we've always done it to ourselves, right? We may not want to admit that, but you have. That's the only reason you'll be able to see it. This is why I started with the universal laws. If you see it, you did it. Now you got to figure out how you did it. Okay? Doesn't mean you're a good or bad person. It just means, oh, this is an experience. So what you do then is you say, okay, they're yelling. That's abusive. They're name calling or they're lying or whatever it is that they're doing. And then you address it. But now when you can see it and own it, and even a small way within yourself, you can respond to it, right? And that responding to it is going to have a lot more power. It's going to have a lot more significance. This is why some people are heard and attended to in the workplace and others are not. This is the thing that people cannot put their finger on, but they want to know what it is. And I'm telling you what it is. You have to own that you've done it to yourself. And I tell people, even if you can't see how you've done it, the fact that you can say, you know what, I've had to have done it to myself. And if I've done that to myself, oh my goodness, how sad is that for me? And to not even know that I'm doing it. But I can't allow this to happen to me here because that doesn't feel good. I'll explore how I've done that later, but right now I may need to say something. And you'll speak from that place of awareness of, you know what, it really tears me down when you yell at me. I want to be productive, but how can I be productive when all you do is beat me down? Is there a different way that we can connect so I give the best parts of what I have to this project? right? That's not weakness, that's power. That is strength. But you can't come from that place if you act as if that has never happened to you. Then the power is, and the answers are always going to be outside of you, and you will always be at the mercy of someone else. Does that make sense?
That's great. And that actually leads us to another question. Is there value to retroactively telling previous coworkers about situations in which they disrespected you and you didn't say anything if the functional relationship has ended? Or is it better to observe yourself and orient those changes towards the future?
It depends, right? So these are not those yes and no, black and white answers. It depends. Sometimes, doesn't matter. It's over, right? It's just a story. Stories don't count. Stories are the experience. You're looking for the essence of the experience and the lesson there. So sometimes if you're going to have an ongoing relationship with them, of course you would need to address it appropriately. But if they've moved to Iceland or to the North Pole to be one of Santa's helpers, you flying up there and giving them a piece of your mind is completely unhelpful. And I've known people who've done that. There's other ways to achieve the same result without having to go back directly to the person and kind of do the pointy finger thing. That's not taking back your power. That's not helpful. And most people don't feel even the slightest bit better. In fact, they tend to feel worse because it doesn't change anything, because you still didn't get the lesson. Once you get the lesson, you won't need to go back, especially if that relationship has ended. Now, if that relationship comes across and you're going to have to work together, of course you're going to bring it up if it happens again, or as a way of setting the tone for that relationship moving forward. This is why it's going to require you to be aware of yourself, aware of where your strengths and your weaknesses are. These questions that come up in interviews don't just come up just to be coming up. What are you good at? What are you not so good at? These are ways for us to know, do you have boundaries? Do you have a sense of awareness where you can take personal responsibility? Remember, personal responsibility and self-awareness, those are the things that help you to not take things personally. This is when people feel safe with you, because they can come and they can tell you how they're feeling about something you've done and feel safe doing that. And sometimes the experience that we lack is a feeling of safety that I can express myself. Okay? And I know we're wrapping up on time, so let's go to the next slide, and then we'll take questions at the end. The next slide is, what would I like to do instead? Okay? So even if you don't get to the point where you identify how I do that and and you say, yes, I'm just going to presume I've done that to myself, I'll look at it later. I'll go to therapy or whatever. I want you to identify the type of response you would like to have towards yourself and others. Is it more patient? Is it more compassionate? Is it more Socratic and curious? I'm wanting to know if that's what happened or what just happened there. I want to just check in, right? What was the essence of what you needed? Maybe you needed just a few minutes to pull yourself together, because maybe that's what they need. And you can say, hey, do you need some time to kind of get grounded and pull yourself together and gather your words? Because sometimes that's what people need. Sometimes that's what we need. What would have been a more supportive response to your need? How could someone have supported you better, responded to you better? And then you have a point of reference of how to move forward in the situation you're in. This is why we need to know. This is why we have to take responsibility that I've done this in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not the same way they've done it. I might not even be doing it anymore. But there's a lesson in this, because that's going to help me get through this situation. And then I want you to consider that situation and remember what you needed when you look at that person and respond, whether it's via email, face-to-face in the meeting, because that's what's really going to allow people to hear you. And consider changing behavior because of that, because you're providing what we call a corrective emotional experience for them. Okay? And let's move on to the next slide, because at the end of the day, this is what frees everybody, and that is gratitude. Your gratitude for the lessons and the teachers and the practice you have to get it right, right? Every exaggerated experience is truly an opportunity for you to grow, for you to evolve. And in your career, in your industry, you're going to have to be able to do that. We call that resilience. A lot of times people don't understand the pop psychology words, resilience, and all this other stuff, coaching. And these are words or buzzwords that soften your ego to be able to consider something deeper. This isn't superficial work. Being an executive and heading up a Fortune 50 or Fortune 10 company requires you to have a sense of awareness at a deep level, right? When you have these experiences, this is about the lessons that you needed to learn. Once you're grateful that I needed to learn that lesson, and you're grateful that everybody that gave you the hardest time was probably one of your best teachers, you're going to be grateful for that, because without them, you wouldn't have even been aware that you needed to know this or that you needed to do that. And then you have an opportunity to get that real world practice. Because once you get that practice on yourself, now all that money you spent going to communication trainings and conflict resolution trainings, now you can use it. Now it will be genuine. Now it will be organic instead of feeling like it's scripted. And I know a lot of you, if not all of you, know how to be with that, have been with someone and it didn't feel like they meant it. Okay, so let's move to the next slide, because this is the one that I really want you guys to be mindful of. Because once you start to integrate and become a little more aware than you are today, you're going to get what I call pop quizzes. And pop quizzes are basically little gifts from the universe. This is a practice that you're going to need in order to make that thank you so much, in order to make those moments smoother, so you don't have a reaction to it. You can have a response to it. And you won't be able to just simply respond and bring down the intensity unless you get practice over and over and over again. No different than an athlete. You got to do the same thing over and over and over again so it seems natural. And you'll notice that those same situations that come up won't have the kind of effect on you. You won't even notice that it's a situation. It becomes just another moment, right? In the beginning, it's challenging and frustrating, but over time, you realize, hey, there's a reason for this. And when you fall into that, that's when the whole world opens up and you have a whole new choice of experiences that you can have. Okay? And we have 1 minute left. And the next slide is simply my thank you for being here. I hope this was helpful. I'm willing to stay on after the 1 o'clock hour and answer questions, but I want to honor people's time to get back to work and maybe take a walk around their building and get grounded. But I do want to say thank you for being here, and I'm here. My email is there. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions.
Thank you, Jinnie, so much. And thank you, everyone who participated. I do want to be mindful of everyone's time, so we will end at 1. But thank you for joining us for the second installment of this month's Career Month programming. Jinnie has so graciously shared with everyone who attended today her ebook on interpersonal skills. So that is in the handouts function, but we will also be sending that out via email. As noted, this will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, and we encourage you to check out all of the other great programming that you have available to you during the month of November. So thank you very much, Jinnie, and to everyone who joined today. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you the rest of the month.